Hello, my name is Tracy Johnson, and I am with She Raised and Associates. And today, as a part of our discussion for this short time, I want to talk about community readiness and resources as you look within your school setting and your community setting. This particular workshop, that this conversation will cover how to really identify and work with long-term sustainability that is so important. Sustainability is a process and not a result. We hope to have you understand what community readiness is and identify resources to implement programs that utilizes the sustainability planning model. We hope that you will have the knowledge of the key actions to demonstrate the effectiveness and of readiness and how to cultivate that. It is hope our main thing is that we will do an overview of capacity building, we'll do an overview of community readiness, and then we'll talk about those readiness pieces in these few minutes. And we hope that you get a really good piece out of it. For those of you who are not familiar, and some of you are, SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, Strategic Prevention Framework. And we're going to take it from that because the framework really focuses on five key areas, as you see there in front of your screen: assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation, with two particular in the middle of this process is sustainability and cultural competence. And one of the unique things that we want to talk about today is that we want to talk about capacity and how it can be used equitable within this work of sustainability. When I talk about capacity, I'm really referencing the idea of three critical areas: mobilization of those resources that's within a school or in a community that is important to identify and know what's there, bringing those key folks together and organizations together in your identified area to plan and implement really sustainable prevention efforts. And then also looking at your school and community's level of readiness to engage in and support prevention and mental health promotion efforts. When I think about capacity, to me, it says the formula of readiness plus resources is capacity. To make it simplified for you, think of that formula. Capacity is about readiness and resources, okay? So let's go into a quick definition of capacity even more deeper. When we think about capacity, we really look at the types and levels of resources that's available to maintain a good prevention system. So we want to look at what's out there, what's in the community, what type of resources are there, what level of resources are there. And then also, when we're looking at capacity, we also want to look at the sense of readiness, because a lot of times our communities, your communities, you want to know what level of readiness they are to address the prevention concerns or mental health concerns that's in the community. And so understanding that there's the types and resources plus the ability for readiness. And then, of course, once you know what that is, now we got to mobilize it, right? When I talk about mobilization, I'm talking about the real important focus of stakeholders, mobilizing those resources, because we want them to implement. We want them to help implement programs. We want them to help implement school policies, and we really want to ask them to help us implement prevention and school-based mental health services, so they can not only know that they're there, but to help move it forward, and you don't have to do it all alone. And so when we talk about that, we talk about moving that forward. So when I look at community readiness, I look at community readiness from a sense of, really measuring the level of readiness that your school or community is ready to do programs, policies, and any other changes that are designed to reduce the likelihood of substance use and provide prevention behavioral health services to your school. If, in fact, the school if you in fact know the level of readiness of your school and or your community, that will be very helpful for you as you move forward in getting a chance to identify the right strategies to really help you do this correctly. So community readiness is important, resources is important. I think I've mentioned that to you in these last 2 or 3 minutes 3 times. Resource, readiness, and then mobilization, right? So in order for us to be ready, We have to know what our community and what level our communities are at and what levels our schools are at. Why do I talk about community readiness so much? Because community readiness, it really helps you understand the attitudes of your community. What are the attitudes? Identify where capacity might need improvement. What other areas of resources we might be missing, what other areas of resources that are there, but we don't have them involved. So we have to think about that. And also, it helps us to develop strategies that are based on that level of readiness. Once we know our readiness, then that helps us identify how we're going to move the level of readiness so they can be ready, the community and the school can be ready to accept our workshops, our trainings, and our programs that we want to do in our community. And what I also like about community readiness, it really serves as a catalyst for true systems change. Because once we know where our community and our school environment is at in terms of levels of readiness, then we know that we can get them to that point where they're 100% ready, where they're ready to move forward and really begin to participate in an effective strategy that's going to be useful because the school community and the community at large is really ready. And that's really important. If they're not ready, then what's going to happen is if you're going in there with a program or with a service, what's going to happen is going to be crash and burn if you're not ready. So we want to make sure that we know the level of readiness that a school system is. And the best way to do it is using the strategic prevention framework and understanding the importance of particularly of capacity building within your school setting. So I like to use the analogy of NASA or now these spaceships that are going up into the sky, coming back down, that it's about counting up to community readiness. We need to know what level of readiness that our community is at this time. So when we talk about that, we want you to think about these critical stages. It is these 9 stages of level of readiness that you can measure and utilize it for the work that you're doing in your school or community environment. We may have your school community or your community at either level 1 or 2 or 3, but we want to move them up so it becomes a really institutionalized process and usually really engaging it within the setting. So they say, yeah, we want to do prevention. Yes, we want to do behavioral health services in our community. I want you to think about it just for a minute. You know, what stages of readiness what you think that your school or community is at? Let's go back to that, and so I can show you again. Think about what level your school or your community is at from your perspective. Now, there are some awesome surveys that are at no cost that you can use from the Colorado State University. It's called the tri-ethnic model as well. You can use these free readiness tools that you can give to key folks in your school, key folks in your community, ask them to fill it out, and then you can use that information to help you measure the level that you see there on the screen that your community is at in terms of readiness. But let's go over each one of those. When we talk about stages of readiness, right? We're talking about first, if they have no tolerance, they clearly have no knowledge. They have high tolerance, but no knowledge. There's a minimum that they have no idea what's really going on in the school or in the community. There's no active recognition that we didn't even change anything. So it's really important to know that if your school measures or your community measures at that level, then we have to figure out what best strategies do we implement to get them to the next level, which happens to be denial. If you have found out in measuring your school or your community that they're at the denial level, then that says to you is that the community recognizes the issue that, yeah, it's here, but they believe it's not a really local problem and no really reason to act on it. So if you come to the point where you find your school at that level, then that's going to also tell you what you might need to do and need to adjust. That third level of readiness, if you find through your measurement tool that your community is at a vague awareness level, then that says to me is that some of your members of your community, they really know, hey, there's a problem, but what can we do about it? What really is can be done? It's always been that way. So why even think about moving it forward? So a lot of times you find that, at the vague awareness stage that, hey, they realize it's there, but they feel that they can't really do too much about it to really impact change. And then pre-planning. If you come to that stage of readiness where, there's a sense that something should be done, and hey, let's even start talking about it. And many times that gives you an opening door to really begin to educate, inform, engage people to learn even more about this whole concern that's going on in your community. That they know that there's something that should be done. That is the first step of making that process moving forward to engage the community members in some sort of uh, uh, identification that what we might need to do or what we can do about it. The other piece is about preparation. That level of readiness says that, hey, not only are we know that something needs to be done, but at preparation stage, we also know that we want to begin to address this issue. This is an issue that we want to address. This is what we want to do. We want to even help. We want to help set the plans for it. And we want to gather some resources. We really want to be engaged and really move this forward. And we want to address this issue. We want to set the planning stages and we want to really gather those resources. Those are the first five that I wanted to show you at first and know where you are. Understand where your school or community or both is at in terms of level of readiness from five all the way down to one. Okay? So the other stages of readiness is six. Not only have they really started doing the plans, but they're really starting to do initiation. And at this stage level, excuse me, if you measure and find out that your school and your community is at initiation, that means that their active efforts are made to really implement the plans that they put in place. Now, understand though that the critical piece of these that they may still be very small and they're not moving sometimes as fast as you would like for them to move, but at least they're moving in a direction of positivity that they know that there's something that has to be done and they're for it and want to make it happen, right? So if you come to that when we get them to stage six, that's where we're ready to really implement them at a smaller scale. But stage seven, we know programmers' efforts are really starting to hum very well. Then they're established. They become a regular part of the community action that we want to do. You begin seeing that folks are engaged and see this as a concern and see the programs are important and see that, hey, this belongs here and we want to keep it here and we want to move these programs to be effective for our kids and their families. You start to see the institutionalization and it begins to actually stabilize at this point in terms of what it's doing. And then after that wonderful stabilization, institutionalization stage, you might find your community ready to confirm itself that, hey, this is important. We see progress. And we might want to say, hey, not only did we start out in one school or in one or two communities within our school community, we want to start doing it in other ones so we can expand it or even look at it, how can we make it better? How can we refine those efforts to ensure that what we're doing stays around after we have already started implementing it or what we know as sustainability. And then the next one is professionalism. At this point, you are running a well-established machine that's really focusing on that level of readiness, the programs that are going on, the behavioral health strategies that's happening. Those things are moving at a nice speed, at a nice pace. They're evaluated. Some of them are seen as best practices, and the community leads are in this area are involved. They're very much involved. They see it as an important part. They want to do something to build up the opportunity for sustaining the efforts. And if you got them at this level, this is an important level because now they really want to make sure that it stays around, right? So when we look at that, we look at this as a really an important area. So take an idea. and tell me, looking at all those different roles you see there, and if you can take a guess or an estimation, where do you think your community or school leader is at? Where do you think the parents are at? Where do you think, that skeptical community partner will be at? What about people who are doing prevention like yourself, so behavioral health wellness coordinators? Where are you at in terms of that level of readiness? Because as you gauge that level of readiness, that helps you decide where you need to go and what you want to do in terms of building up that level of readiness scale from tolerance all the way to professionalism. So, how do we do this? How do we make sure that this is going to happen? I always call it drafting your dream team, that team that's going to make sure that things are working and working in sync. So, I need for you to go over spend some time with yourself and maybe look at that sense of who can we bring to the table? Who else should we have as a part of our dream team? And what potential scenarios are important as we move this forward to impact our communities to make this happen, right? So then I want you to be able to think about, either email me or leave in the chat box what you think you should be doing. What strategies would you use to engage the community at the stage that you think the community's at? What barriers might you encounter, and how would you address those barriers? And then what resources or partnerships could be helpful to really bring that and really stabilize the level of readiness in your community. The next thing I want to talk about is, remember I said readiness is one part of sustainability. The other part is resource. You've got to do a resource inventory of your schools, of your communities, so you know what you have or what you don't have as of yet. So when we talk about resource inventory, we're clearly talking about the importance of looking at the individual and are there resources that they bring to the table? What does Tracy bring to the table around skills or talents or even expertise or trainings, right? What are the key pieces that that individual person can bring? But we also need to measure what are those key pieces that organizations have and can bring? What are those resources they have? Maybe they have a transportation van. Maybe they're having a potluck for parents at a PTA nearby. So where are those skill sets and what are those resources, if you will, for both the school and the community, but in a way that if it's already there, it's definitely eligible for opportunities to do a good resource inventory and know where individuals are as well as organizations are. Okay? So, in order to make that happen, we've got to make sure that we are doing that resource inventory. And this is what one looks like. You want to look at your skill set, the expertise that people who are in the school buildings or in the community have, and you want to write those names and who those folks are based upon many of the categories of the skills that you see in the screen right here. We want to make sure that we're touching bases with all multitude of services that you see here. Maybe you find someone who does grant writing. Maybe you find someone who does really good group facilitation. Maybe you find someone who really is helping you with the media and how do you deal with that. And I know that you all have these are very important resources as a part of your ACC in terms of the actual hand-on to make this happen. So I know this is a great opportunity for you all to move this forward. But we do know this. We do know that mobilizing resources is so, so critical. Why do I say that? It's because mobilizing resources is a critical moment. And so when we talk about mobilizing resources, we're talking about resources that the types and levels of asset that exist in a surrounding community that can help meet the inventory, help meet the prevention planning, and help meet the ability to implement evidence-based strategies. So I want to stop here and let you ask you a few questions. What do you think your community is at as it relates to community readiness? Secondly, What do you think about your level of community uh, when it relates to this morning, this call, this tape here? What does that mean? What level of resources do you think your community is at? What level of readiness do you think they're at? And begin to ponder, if you will. Once you know that, this will really help you move it forward. So this ends part one of sustainability, capacity building, and understanding community readiness. Thank you.